Hi, thank you for joining us for this webinar. This is Nikolai Lundy. I'm the Director of Education and Partnerships at SASB, and we are excited to be able to get this going. Let's make sure that we've got our screen settings correct. All right. So we've got about 100 and some odd people who have already signed in, so we're really glad to have you. We are going to be covering a few different things, and just so that you know, we want to get the logistics out of the way to begin with. We will certainly share out the slides and a recording of this to anybody who wants to see that afterwards. Throughout the webinar, we'll have some poll questions, and those are just meant to get a read of who is signed on and kind of help make sure that we can tailor some of our comments based on who's here and what would be most useful. We also will be taking questions and either answering them from SASB's perspective or the perspective of our panelists. So feel free to type in questions into the question box. And we will also have a brief survey at the end, just 3 simple questions that will be helpful for us to get your feedback. So let's just jump right in. I think that we always try and give a minute or two for the stragglers, but let's take a look at the agenda. So we know that we have a mix of people who have logged on, and we want to make sure that we can answer a range of different questions. So we have some folks who have already started the credential, some people have finished it, and a lot of folks who are trying to decide if this is right for them. So we're going to do a bit of an overview of what the FSA Credential is, and then hear from 3 people who have gone through the program, passed both exams, and earned the credential, so you can kind of get a flavor of what they thought about it. And then we'll talk about the ways in which we've gone through some updates over the past year and the rationale behind that and how that affects you or could affect you. And then also kind of what has stayed the same, what you can continue to expect from the program, and then make sure that there's certainly time for Q&A. So let me have our panelists introduce themselves really quickly, and we'll be able to hear a lot more from them as the webinar goes on. But we have 3 fantastic folks from a range of different backgrounds who have agreed to spend their time kind of sharing how they've interacted with and what they've gotten out of the FSA Credential. So first, let's start with MJ. MJ, do you mind introducing yourself?
Sure, thank you, and hello everyone, and thank you to SASB for inviting me to participate on this webinar. I'm happy to do it. My name is Marie-Josée Privic. I'm an associate with Milani. Milani is a small advisory firm providing advisory services to both investors and corporate clients on ESG integration. And I have a background in capital markets. I used to be a sell-side analyst for a number of years. I have a CFA. I also spent many years in investor relations. So I hail from the capital markets, as you would say.
Excellent. Thanks so much, MJ. We really appreciate you spending your time with us. So let's hear from John.
Hello, and thank you, Nikolai, for giving me the opportunity to speak as well. So my name is John Thigpen. I'm with JLL, and I'm on our Energy and Sustainability Services team. So JLL is a global commercial real estate company. We work as strategic partners with customers with large real estate portfolios and provide energy and sustainability performance monitoring, as well as energy and sustainability project implementation services, and so that this FSA Credential aligns very closely with the type of work that we currently do.
Okay, thanks so much, John. Looking forward to hearing more as we go through. How about Lily?
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here and talk a little bit more about my experience with the Credential. I am the Sustainability Officer at Aspiration, which is a financial technology startup that is democratizing sustainable investing and sustainable banking. And one of the features we have is in our checking account is a way to see the impact of your spending on people and the planet. And so this, Credential is obviously very helpful in becoming familiar in what kind of data to use for presenting sustainability information to your everyday person. We also offer a mutual fund that's sub-advised by UBS called the Redwood Fund, and their investment strategy uses the SASB standards. So, this FSA Credential is also very helpful in understanding the mutual fund that we offer. So.
Okay, thanks, Lily. Great to get to know you better. So those are our panelists, and like I said, we're going to be able to hear more from them so that you can get their perspectives. But we want to start with a quick poll question, and this will give us the opportunity to just get a better sense of who is here. So we wanted to hear from you. So I'm going to turn over to my colleague, Andreas Pappas, who will lead us through the poll.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for calling in today. So this first poll is to really see why all of you called in. Maybe for the first response, you see updates and changes to the Credential, or you're really trying to understand more about the value proposition, or how the FSA community is evolving, or maybe all of the above. So if you just take a minute to answer that, that'd be great. All right, last few seconds, and we'll take a look at the results. Great, so it looks like 34% tie for value proposition of the Credential and all of the above. So it's good to see that everyone is excited to look at all three of these reasons why you came to the call. So thanks for participating.
Great, thanks, Andreas. So let's dive into a little bit about what the FSA Credential is and why it exists and who we see signing up for it. So let's see. Can you see my screen? Huh. We're showing this. Sorry about this. I've done this several times. I've never had this. It says that the application is paused, and then when I push the play button, oh, it unpaused itself. There we go. Sorry about that. Getting back on track. It's never a webinar without something kind of going wrong. So thank you, everyone, for bearing with us. It's just part of life, I suppose. But the FSA Credential, and FSA stands for Fundamentals of Sustainability Accounting, is designed to really help identify the overlap and intersection between sustainability performance and financial performance. And so we do that in two different ways, or in two levels. The first study guide and the first exam is really designed to take a wide range of puzzle pieces and put them all together so you can understand the key principles. And it really aligns around how can sustainability information be financially material? What is the context, understanding, and criteria under which that could happen? And then as a result, what are the implications for companies and investors? How does that inform corporate management and data collection, and when appropriate, how they report that information? And when there's information available, how that informs, how that can inform an investment analysis and plug into everything from the fundamental valuation models to the whole portfolio management assessment of risk and return. So that level one really covers this broad range of key concepts to, like I said, bring all these puzzle pieces together, because we have a wide range of candidates and test takers as reflected with our panelists who are on here today, all with different backgrounds and roles. Level 2 takes that a step farther and tries to build off what you learned with level 1 to give you a little bit more practical exposure and simulated case studies and experiences for how you can apply that experience in order to get a more enhanced understanding of a company's performance and how that can inform the value based on the information related to sustainability factors. So they're certainly designed with kind of the synergies in mind and meant to be building blocks as you go through. When we look at who has signed up, the first exam, level 1, was made available in 2015, and the next exam came out at the end of 2016. So what we see is that there are over half of the candidates have a CFA or CPA or MBA, wide range of backgrounds in the time that we've had this signed up. And most candidates spend about 20 to 30 hours. So this is not a CFA or a CPA or anything else that has, hundreds of hours of study time. This is really meant to provide substantive education without kind of being the primary focus or sole competency that you would expect to have. It's meant to complement the range of different backgrounds that people come in with and create a common understanding and common language for that. And so what we end up seeing is a wide range of experience levels, from some folks who are relatively new to their careers and some folks who have lots of experience and recognize that this is a growing area where they need to learn more. And for those of you that do have a CFA, or if you're a management accountant and you have the CMA, this is approved for continuing education. So just to look a little bit more in detail at the curriculum that is covered, I mentioned that level 1 is really the principles, and it's designed to create this common understanding and common language. And that breaks down into 3 key kind of content areas. One is how sustainability information can be material in the same way that financial information can be. How SASB's methodology for going through a process of collecting feedback from the market, identifying evidence of financial impact, is designed to help improve the decision usefulness and comparability of sustainability information. And then how that information can ultimately impact companies and investors. So we take this broad look at what the information is and how it can be useful and improve comparability and still balance kind of expectations and burdens on companies. And then what the implications are, so that you get that clear understanding of where there's overlap between the way that companies are thinking about this and the way that investors are thinking about this. Level 2, as I mentioned, builds off that, and it's really about being able to better interpret and understand that information so you can have a more sophisticated analysis and understanding of a company's performance and value. One thing that we don't do is go so far as to say, this company should make this management decision, or this analyst should make this kind of buy, sell, hold decision, or they should set the price at XYZ, or the terminal value should ultimately be determined at this. We don't go so far as to say what the right answer is, because every company, every analyst, every situation is slightly different. What we're focused on is how can you make sure you're understanding the underlying information, how to interpret it, and how that can then lead to your own conclusions without SASB saying what the right conclusion is for a company, for an analyst, for anyone in between. So we do that by covering 3 areas. First, we try and give you some guidelines around how you can understand a company's operations or operating context in order to influence the materiality of sustainability information. Not every company is obviously the same, even if they are in the same industry. Sometimes they have different geographic areas where they operate. Sometimes they have different models for how they source or manufacture their goods or provide their services. So those differences can sometimes lead to differences in what information is going to be most important and relevant to understanding that company. And so we walk through different ways in which you can consider those differences. We also then walk through how you can look at and better compare peer companies and use kind of common techniques for normalization, adding contextual information. Like I said, no two companies are exactly the same. So when you're comparing, it's never going to be a perfect comparison. So what context do you need to look for? How is that going to shape the interpretation of the information so that you get a more refined and nuanced comparison? And then lastly, we kind of point you in the right direction of thinking about, as you see different performance from companies on sustainability information, if you're within that company or you're analyzing that company or you're a consultant advising that company, anyone who's working with that information, how can you think about performance on SASB topics and SASB metrics and how that ties to your understanding of the financial value that company is creating. Again, whether you work inside that and you're trying to make the argument to your management team, or whether you're an analyst or whether you're a consultant, the information can provide similar insights. So that's what we cover with level 1 and level 2. One thing that I always like to point out is that this content was really developed based on the input and work of a lot of very generous volunteers who work with this information and ultimately have a kind of interest in seeing this field grow and expand. So we really were keen on having an organizing structure, some sort of scope of what could be within and without, what would be in and out of consideration. And that's where the SASB standards provided a good framework and structure. But then we had these subject matter experts populate it and turn it into something that reflected their perspectives, their experiences, their knowledge based on their work. And we were very intentional to get a range of different folks involved, because we know that when you think about sustainability information, there's a range of folks who use that, from people who collect the data, work with the data, report the data within companies, those who analyze the data, those who provide services to investors and consultants. We wanted to have all of those different perspectives. So this is just a sample of the folks who were involved. We had about 30 to 40 over the course of the 2 different programs. They're the ones who wrote all the exam questions, or reviewed the exam questions, or helped set an appropriate pass-fail score. Not everyone did everything, but there was kind of a range of different folks that had some part to play. And they're all listed on our website if you want to see who is involved. So this was really designed to reflect what market participants were experiencing and thinking, and it's not just coming straight from SASB. So let's get another poll and kind of get a sense of who you are and the work that you do. So turning it over to Andreas again.
Great, thanks, Nikolai. So just as Nikolai mentioned, we just want to learn a little more about our audience. So if you could describe your work either as investment management, sustainability within a company, accounting, consulting, or other. Great, in just a few more seconds. Great, so it looks like majority of the group is consulting or investment management, but we do have a pretty diverse audience with sustainability, accounting, and other. So thank you everyone for participating.
All right, so let's get the screen back here. So I think looks like the wrong screen. These polls are getting in our way today. There we go. So here's what we know about the folks who have signed up so far. Broad range of countries represented, broad range of experience. The top 3 types of roles and job functions that we see are analysts, consultants, and corporate sustainability professionals. Periodically, we get asked how difficult or how many people end up passing. We do see that there's differences between level 1 and level 2. There's an average 80 to 85% of folks who pass the level 1 exam. It's between 65 and 70% for those who pass level 2. So we do see that that's a little bit harder, but part of that is based on the feedback that we got for study prep. And so that's one of the ways in which we've updated it in the last month and a half. And we'll look forward to sharing more about what we've done to increase the level of study prep for level 2. So that's the background. I said that with the agenda, we just wanted to cover kind of what the program is, who's signing up, what the content is. And because we saw in that first poll that there were a lot of you who were new to the program, hadn't taken it before. So let's hear a little bit more from our panelists, from the folks who have gone through the program. And we've got a few questions that we've prepared, and we're also going to start turning to some of the questions that each of you have asked. But to begin with, we're going to start with MJ and say, MJ, what was it that made you decide to sign up for the FSA Credential? What were you hoping to get out of it?
Sure, thank you. To me, the FSA met a need, filled a void that I saw in the marketplace. I was very much at I call it the nexus between companies and investors. I was actually in IR at the time, and I saw the growing demand for sustainability or ESG information. And companies have to be able to provide that kind of information to investors, and there's quite a big gap between the two. I think the FSA, I think SASB in general, I must say, was created to fill that need and does so extremely well. I found the FSA program was well structured. SASB documents and products are in general very well articulated, and that's very helpful in getting the message out and communicating it to people. There's a lot of education to be had in this field, and so the SASB documentation is generally very useful. The program itself was well structured. To your point in your earlier comments, it's doable. It's not a crazy, hard, intense, it will take you 3 years to complete kind of program, but at the same time, informational and very applicable.
Great, thanks, MJ. I'm also curious. You touched about this a little bit about the applicability of the content, but just to dive into that a little bit more, each level of the program comes with 2 study guides. What did you think about that? And were there particular things that you remember learning that were new to you?
Oh, memory being what it is. Off the top of my head, I must say, not a specific example that comes to mind. The study guides were obviously very useful to going through the program, taking the exams. I find the information, the issues raised, very mainstream issues. The concept of materiality, which is really the fundamental, the basis of the philosophy and the approach of SASB, is central, and it's so central to what investors are looking at and talking about, and that's the connection. That's part of that connection. The program for me, the content was actually most useful in crystallizing certain content concepts and in clarifying them. I must say that maybe having the financial background, I had a little bit of an advantage or an edge on somebody who may be approaching the curriculum from more of a sustainability or an environmental or social or other dimension. But and having said that, remains very doable because it's, I think, good common sense business practices that are being addressed. So for me, more of a crystallization and a connection to very much mainstream issues, which historically has been lacking when people talk about sustainability performance.
Okay, great, MJ. Thanks for sharing that. I want to ask the same question for John and Lily. So let's start with John. John, what motivated you to sign up? You come from a different background, and maybe we're looking to get something else out of it.
Sure. So a couple of reasons why I decided to pursue the FSA credential. The first was basically out of necessity. So at the time I began pursuing this credential, my former employer was in the process of being acquired. I was on part of that integration team, and the outlook for my future was not very appealing. So I knew I was going to be entering the job market fairly soon, and I thought the FSA credential would differentiate myself from other sustainability job seekers. Second reason, and clearly the more important one, is probably going to be most germane to the roughly 10% of you that responded to the poll and indicated you were sustainability professionals. So, for like many seasoned sustainability professionals, I've endured plenty of bumps and bruises and trying to communicate and stress the value of sustainability to seemingly indifferent employers and clients. So we've been kind of as a profession waving our arms for years saying this stuff is really important, pay attention. But the progress has been slower than many of us would like. So, SASB and the FSA credential particularly taught me how to better connect ESG performance to financial performance. And that's enabled me to better communicate the value of investments in corporate sustainability solutions. And so, that was by far the most important reason why I pursued this credential.
Okay, that's really helpful. I didn't know that, so it's always nice to learn more about kind of people's backgrounds. I'd love to turn to the next question that we also asked MJ, John. What did you think about the content, the study guides, and what you took away from it?
Well, for someone who has a more technical background in engineering and sciences, I would say, it's sustainability accounting, but as far as the content goes, it's very heavy in accounting terms and concepts and not so much on sustainability. So, the language need to be written, kind of in crayon for me in order to really understand it thoroughly. And I thought it was really well articulated and put it in layman's terms. So for someone with my type of background, I could still, glean a lot from the study guides and pass the exam, frankly. I find them incredibly useful, and to kind of drive that point home, I've read each of those study guides at least twice since after passing the exam.
Oh, really? That's really good to hear, and I can verify they weren't written in crayon. And you obviously got through it no problem. So I think you're not giving yourself enough credit. Let's turn to Lily. What about you? What was your kind of motivation in signing up for the program?
Sure. So as I had mentioned in my introduction, just that when I started this job at Aspiration, and we were launching this new feature of trying to present, scores that captured the environmental and social performance of different companies to consumers. The first task and order of business was evaluating different ESG data providers. So I was looking into MSCI and Sustainalytics, Thomson Reuters, and a bunch of more specialized data providers, and realized two things from that. One is that a lot of them, their takeaways were very different on the companies. So McDonald's might have been given an A by Sustainalytics, and then a C by MSCI, or the equivalent, rating. And so that was hard for us because we really wanted to figure out what was the most important and material information to use in our ratings that we could then share. And then the other thing was looking at these ratings, a lot of the companies weren't disclosing information. And there were, hundreds and hundreds of metrics out there. And so this concept of what is it actually important that companies are reporting on? It's not necessarily bad if they're not disclosing all 400 plus metrics that are out there, for some of these different ESG vendors, but which ones do we really need to be focusing on? So then, having SASB being able to codify and kind of comb through what is actually important based on different industries was really attractive and helpful, because it meant that, all of these weren't relevant to every company, but we could really look at it based on different industries and what was important there, and then find the information that was relevant based on the different companies' industries. So that was really helpful, and a reason that I took the exam.
That's great to hear, Lily, and interesting to hear kind of those perspectives, especially because they really speak to two of the reasons that we think SASB exists, which is that it's not true necessarily that more data is better data, that really zeroing in on what's most important can help you see what moves the needle. But then also, if you're relying purely on scores from different ratings and rating agencies, then you're kind of at the whim of their interpretations. But if you have the underlying data and can compare the fundamental performance, then you're able to come to your own conclusions. So that's why SASB doesn't do ratings or rankings, and that's also why we don't collect the data ourselves. So really interesting to hear that there's very close alignment between what you were looking for and what we're here to help with. So looking to the content specifically, did you get any impressions? Do you have any memories from the study guide and the content and how it's presented and what you took away from it?
Yeah, so I'm trying to think. I've had a little bit more time than MJ to reflect on it a bit. But I think one thing that stands out is how SASB is really serving a similar role that FASB was in terms of standardizing, accounting. And so, it's doing the same thing for sustainability accounting. And I honestly believe that it's going to, I don't know if it's going to be 5 years or 10 years, but all this is going to truly be adopted by all companies, and all investors are going to, be using it. So I think it's really an amazing opportunity for, people who are considering taking the exam, and those who have already taken it, to kind of get in at the ground floor and learn all this, and then also see how it develops. Because another thing from the study material was that, it's very transparent in how the standards are derived, and how there's a lot of stakeholders that are involved in giving input on what they consider to be material, and it's a really, really rigorous process. So I think the study guide is great in terms of understanding what is material to different companies and different industries, and you'll get that from for a practical perspective, but then also just in terms of being in this field of sustainable investing. This is a way of getting all the different stakeholders together to figure out what should be measured, and the process is explained very well as well. And I think you guys are really open about how this is constantly evolving and changing. So yeah, I'm glad I took it now, because now I feel like I can keep up instead of have to catch up later.
Interesting. That's great to hear. So we've got one other question that we chatted with each of the panelists beforehand that might be useful for those of you in the audience to hear. And so I'm going to turn back to MJ and see, have you used anything that you learned from the FSA credential? Have you been able to apply it in a way that you can remember?
I use it almost on a daily basis. So the concept of materiality, I think, and how it applies to ESG issues, and how that's the, as I mentioned already, the connection to investors. I talk about that, and on almost a daily basis, both with investors who are, obviously are very much aligned with this, but also to companies, public companies, namely, who have to be reporting information to their investors. Many times companies are actually disclosing substantial amounts of ESG or sustainability information. They're actually bombarded with questions and or ratings that they don't always ask for. You've alluded to them before. They're getting a little bit lost in the mix, and they're saying we're reporting so much. Why is it that investors are telling us that that they're not getting useful information? So if I had to answer with one concept, it'd be materiality, but really the contents are applicable on a daily basis.
Wow, that's great to hear. John, how about you? Is there how do you find that you're able to apply what you learned, if at all?
Well, it is a work in progress. So, internally, we're trying to see how the SASB content can accomplish several things for our services. Number one is to kind of stay up to speed on the evolution of sustainability reporting and making sure that we can continue to provide our customers with the support that they need to deliver, the reporting that they choose. A second reason is to reinforce the value of the services that we're providing our clients. And I would say kind of as a more direct use of SASB and the FSA, I was lucky enough to present on a panel with SASB's former retail sector analyst to a group of retail sustainability professionals to talk about the importance of materiality and integrated reporting, and so in those regards, I think the FSA and the SASB information has been helpful in lots of different ways, but it's only going to continue to grow.
All right, and that just kind of reflects the fact that everybody's at a different place, and this is a fast-changing space. Lily, how about you? Do you have ways in which you've been able to use what you've learned?
Yeah, I think just, continuing on to what I was saying in terms of, instead of looking for and asking for like the laundry list of metrics, it's much more focused on what actually matters and is material. So that's been immensely helpful. And then also I would say just more broadly, it's completely changed my understanding and perspective of sustainability, and it's changed the way that I read the news and analyze what I'm reading in the news. And if there's an issue at a company, I can think, oh, that's directly material. So it's just from a general education point of view, I think that it's changed my mindset, which I think is just as valuable as the professional application.
Great. Thanks all of you for sharing some of those perspectives. We'll be coming back as we continue to get some other perspectives. And we've got one question that seems appropriate to ask now. We might ask some other questions later, but one person asked, what would prompt a company to hire a consultant who has the FSA credential? MJ, since you consult with both investors and companies, maybe you have a thought on this, and certainly John or Lily can chime in afterwards. But maybe let's start with MJ, see if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, well, in our particular case, we really target a very specific service offering on the corporate side, and that's really helping companies communicate what they're doing on environmental, social, and governance issues to their investor stakeholders. So as opposed to traditional approaches or other frameworks which take a very multi-stakeholder, very broad approach, SASB focuses on the investor stakeholder, and that's that's our market as well. So services would include helping companies actually identify those issues that are ESG issues that they don't consider ESG issues. So the first response is often, no, we don't talk about that. We don't manage ESG, or we don't get questions on ESG, but really material ESG issues are business issues. And so sometimes it's just, there's a lot of information, education, level setting, and then what they're reporting on, doing the materiality assessments, but from an investor perspective, identifying those material issues to their business. Again, from an investor, I should say, capital markets, almost regulatory legal definition, which is what companies are very attentive to. Public companies, that is. And so you're speaking their language, you're reaching them at a completely different level, and you're engaging with departments and senior executives who otherwise had not or would not pay a lot of attention to sustainability issues. There's a disconnect between companies and investors. There's also a disconnect internally often, and to John's earlier comments, between the sustainability department and the CFO, the finance, accounting, executive, CEO offices, and even investor relations and broader communications to some extent. So you're by focusing on these issues and speaking the language of business, if I could use that expression, you're addressing, you're getting the attention of a whole new part of the company, and it's bringing light on these issues and on the on the tremendous work that sustainability departments and CSR professionals have been doing for sometimes several years. I'll stop there. I could go on.
Well, it really resonated with me, MJ, because something that we hear all the time, whether we're talking with companies that are thinking about what they want to do with sustainability, how they want to communicate that, or we're talking with investors, particularly asset managers who are engaging with companies in their portfolio, that there often is this disconnect, or sometimes silos, or however you want to talk about it, between different teams. I've had a few different folks who say that, I came to the FSA with the sustainability background, or I came to it with the investor background, or I came to it with the accounting background, people who come to it with a particular angle, and they end up learning the different pieces to that whole value chain of data collection and internal management and reporting and analysis that, you can bring to a company that they're not always in a position to be able to connect all those dots because sometimes there's silos or different experience levels. So that really resonated with me and made a lot of sense. I want to keep going just so that we can cover a little bit more content, and we'll have some more time for questions. One thing that we wanted to make sure that we made everyone aware of is what's changed with the credential over time. So we, as I mentioned, the level 1 exam and study guide came out in 2015, and the level 2 came out at the end of 2016. So we spent several months in 2017 doing a bit of an update for a few different reasons. One was, this is a space that has changed a lot in the profession in terms of new firms and organizations and sustainability efforts and news and requirements. There's a range of different developments that were notable and valuable to include and update so that the curriculum included the most up-to-date information. SASB had also taken on some more activity and published some new materials, including 5 new sectors worth of standards. And so it was important to incorporate those. And we had kind of done them incrementally, periodically for the past couple of years, but it was good to do a clean, kind of thorough refresh. We also wanted to align our testing processes with other exams. Part of what we've heard from candidates is that they might sign up and the way it used to be designed is you could take the exam any day of the year. We wanted it to be very, accessible and easy to get done. And, as MJ said earlier, this is not meant to be, take 3 years of your life, that it's meant to be substantive but not overwhelming. Well, we heard that when there's so much flexibility, so many options, that it's easy to just put it off. Everyone's got other demands on their time, family and work and volunteer in the community, and et cetera, et cetera. So what we did was we kind of talked with a range of different testing organizations and a consultant, and found out that a good practice is to move to a testing block system, but we wanted to keep it very broad. So we still have 6 months of the year where somebody can take an exam, but it's specific blocks of time, and we'll get into that into more detail. And so it helps kind of create structure to what was otherwise very fluid and unstructured process, and avoids that ease of just constantly procrastinating, where we've had some folks who have rescheduled 25, 30, 35 times. They kind of are their own worst enemy and say that we need to give them some deadlines. So this kind of helps create that structure. We also got feedback from some of the test takers, more support for preparing for the exam, more explanations about the sample questions, and then also just making sure that the content was fresh and current. And so we wanted to make sure that we were responding to that feedback. And the last piece is we got some questions or thoughts around how it'd be nice to do a study group. Folks are studying for this at the same time. They'd like to feel like they can study with others. We tried that once when we had a pilot version of our level 2 exams. It didn't get broad uptake, but we thought that we could kind of rethink it and restructure it and try and support that if people ultimately want it. And so the way that we have these testing blocks allows that to make that possible. So I want to just pose an open question. None of the panelists have to answer it, but if they do, I want to hear if anything that we did as part of these updates is something that you're glad to hear, having gone through the program before these updates, and that you think kind of reflects what you're hoping would be part of the natural evolution of the program. So MJ, Lily, or John, if any of you have thoughts on that, I'd love to hear what kind of these updates you think are most beneficial.
So this is Lily here. I think, yes, the updates are extremely beneficial. I happen to be one of the ones who moved my test exam date, I don't know about 20 times, but a number of times. Not so much because I didn't want to take the exam, but more so because I really enjoyed studying the material. I think I'm also an exception in that I spent way more than 20 to 30 hours with the material. It was, as I said, just a new way of explaining the world and seeing the world. So I ended up wanting to go over, and learn everything I possibly could from the study guides. So I kept pushing it off. So I think the fact that it's in Windows is really helpful, because then I could have, just deep dive, concentrate, and then take the exams. And then the other aspect tying on to that is that, the study groups, I think, will be really helpful as well, because as I was going through the material, I really wanted a group of people to talk to just as ideas would come, or I'd have questions pop up and everything. So I think the fact that there's going to be more of a test taking community will be really a wonderful experience.
Yeah, speaking to that,
John,
go ahead, John.
So just a couple of quick comments. Having taken several credential exams in my lifetime, practice questions, you can't have enough of them. That's a really good way to benchmark your preparedness for the exam. So I like that you're having those as well as explanations, and the study groups particularly, along with the explanations, are going to be helpful because, for the level 2 exam particularly, at least I found it in my experience that I could probably rationalize most of the multiple choice answers that were given to me. And so, having to have others, as sounding boards to kind of talk through why some of those answers are not as correct as the right one would be really beneficial.
I'm glad you mentioned the study groups, and it echoes some of what Lily mentioned. So we've got a poll question here about that. So I'm going to let Andreas walk us through that, and we'll see what people think.
Great. So thanks, Nikolai. So really, for the crowd, we just wanted to know if you would like to participate in these groups, either yes, no, maybe, or not at all. Just gives us a wide variety of answers. Okay, and just a few more seconds. Great. So across the board, 37% yes, 37% maybe. So it's really up in the air, but that is really good feedback for us. So I appreciate everyone's participation. Thank you.
All right. So it's good to get a sense of what people are thinking about and would be helpful with the study group. So we'll kind of take that as good feedback for how we can kind of plan that into the coming months and the upcoming testing blocks. So let's get through a last couple pieces of information that we think is helpful to share out, and then we'll see if we have time for another question or two so that we can still end on time. So just to give you a little bit more detail about what changed, we updated, so we covered just in this last slide why we did some updates. So what specifically changed? The Level 1 study guide got updated with key events and the latest SASB standards. The sample questions got expanded with answer explanations and a couple of new sample questions. So that's not in here on the bullet, but that's what was included. The Level 2 sample questions got expanded to include answer explanations. There was one that we got some feedback that was confusing, so that got adjusted. And we've added what we call bridge content, and we'll show you what that looks like to provide a little bit more of a connection between the study guide and the exam to give that much more support to prepare. For some folks that don't pass the exam, we previously provided some insight into the groups of learning objectives where you maybe didn't do as well as the average candidate and could stand to improve. We've just added more details and insights into that feedback so that everyone has even more information to work on if they are interested in looking for ways to improve. So let's go through and show you some of what that means. So Level 1 and Level 2, the sample questions now include kind of clear explanations pointing back to the content of the question, sometimes places in the study guide where you can go to look for more information. So this is an example of what that looks like, where the incorrect answers have an explanation of why that's not correct, and the correct answer has an explanation of why it is. So we've expanded that for all of the sample questions. And then for Level 2, I mentioned that we created this bridge content, as we're calling it. So after each of the sections of the study guide, we have basically a sample case study, a new sample case study. And then we walk through and we provide 2 or 3 kind of questions associated with that. And we walk through, okay, because you noticed this content in the case study and you get asked this question with question number 1, here's how you draw connections between what was covered in the study guide in section 1.3 and why that relates to what's mentioned here in the case study. And here's how you can kind of deduce that and apply it to this first question. So it tries to take all the puzzle pieces from what you learn in the study guide, what you read in the sample case study, and the question that you get. So that's really clear and transparent. And then that can serve as an additional piece of information to incorporate into study groups, like John mentioned, for being able to work through and better understand how to separate the correct answers from the wrong answers. So the last piece are these testing blocks that we mentioned. So there are now 3 windows of time when the exams are offered. Any day of the year, you can sign up for an exam. So if you are signing up in January, if you sign up today, you can take a test in January, February. Since we're doing this webinar today, we're going to adjust the settings after this webinar so that if you want, you can sign up for an exam in May or June so that you don't have to wait until tomorrow. If you're signing up, you can kind of use this chart to say if it's April and I'm signing up for an exam, I can take the test in May or June. If it's June, I can take it in that month, or I can take it in the next testing block. So the exams are offered during these blue months, and for any month that you sign up, you can kind of see when you're able to choose an exam date. So it gives some of that structure. And if you need to, you can always reschedule an exam. That's certainly possible. It just gives specific times for when those are offered. Just in case you have any questions about when this is happening, we did have some folks who signed up in December who are on the call, and so your exam dates are unchanged. If you signed up for an exam in March, for example, or April, no problem. Your original exam date is going to be kept as it is. There's no forced change for your schedule. If you signed up after December 31st, if you signed up on the 1st of the month or any time after that, then you would have seen that you only had the months of January, February to choose from. So that when we made these announcements back in November and sent out reminders through the course of December, we wanted to give people enough advance warning for what to expect as this went along. So let's spend our last 3 to 4 minutes asking our panelists a final question.
Can I jump in really quickly? I just wanted that we've got a lot of just logistical questions that I think we could answer rapid fire that would benefit the whole group. So one question people asked about exam maintenance once you pass level 1 and level 2. Is there anything that you need to do to maintain your credential?
And right now there is not, but there is questions raised by, among others, our panelists and others about what as this program evolves, what does continuing education look like? How can we offer that? So at the moment, there's nothing required after you pass the exam. That's likely to change in the coming years as this program evolves.
Someone had a quick question about level 2 exam. Is it all multiple choice?
Yep, both level 1 and level 2 are multiple choice. Sometimes there's just one correct answer. Sometimes there's choose 2 correct answers or choose 3. So that's the format you can expect.
Another question was, is there a fixed time period in which you must register for and take the FSA level 2 exam after passing level 1?
Yeah, so you're given 2 years to take the level 2 after you pass level 1. That's outlined in our candidate handbook and part of the materials we send out when you do pass. And that's intended to ensure that there's actually maintenance of your knowledge and that you're not missing out from one to the other.
And then the last rapid fire question is, most people or some people on the call understand that the SASB standards are, there was a comment period that is closing. Do the current exams cover these changes?
Yeah, so what's important to know is that the exam doesn't test whether you know the specific metric or topic in a standard, because you're always going to be able to reference those anytime for free on our website. But the examples that we use in the study guide to kind of drive the point home, those do come from the standards. So when currently we propose changes to the standards, those changes are not final. Today's the last day to submit public comments. Once we process those comments, we have some public hearings for our standards board. Over the next several months, we're going to be finalizing those changes based on the feedback we got to our proposals. Once those are finished sometime this summer, we will then update the FSA study guides to correct any examples where we might have been pointing to topics or metrics in our standards that don't exist anymore. So maybe just one kind of final question in the last bit of time so that we end on time, and relatively rapid fire with MJ, John, and Lily. If you were talking to someone who's not sure whether or not it's worth them signing up, what do you think what would you point them to? How would you kind of encourage them to pursue their own kind of resources for how they might be able to make that decision? So let's start with MJ. Any recommendations for what somebody could do to try and decide whether this is for them?
Sure. Very quickly, explore the SASB website for all of the tools that SASB has to offer, because ultimately that's what you'll be using, and FSA is the key to unlocking those tools.
Okay, great. How about you, John?
I would just say, look at all the supporting evidence showing the, rapidly increasing growth of, impact investing, sustainable investing. I think that's a clear indication of where the field is going, and this is the credential that will help you, play in that space.
Great. It's only going to continue in that direction, I think. How about you, Lily?
Yeah, I would echo what they said, and also potentially check out the SASB Navigator. There's a 48-hour trial that you can look at, but that shows how the standards apply to different companies and how companies are actually reporting on the different standards currently. So that was immensely helpful as well. And then if you're really on the fence, this is just one last thing is, like, if you are involved in sustainable investing, I think taking this exam is a no-brainer, especially after Larry Fink's letter to company executives, asking them to consider or requiring them to consider social impact. I think that this is a great way of, tying social impact sustainability to company financials and the fundamentals, and it's a really easy way to make the case to people who don't understand the value of sustainability in a way that they'll understand. So very much encourage you to take it.
Great. Well, thank you so much to our three panelists for spending not only this hour, but time in prep calls and advanced setup. We really appreciate it. Thanks to the rest of you for joining us. We'll share out the materials, and if you have questions that we didn't have time to answer, feel free to email us, fsa@sasb.org. Hope everyone has a great day, and good luck with studying. All right, take care.